Today, the third day of AFSIC, and we'd like to thank the organizers, AFSIC, for giving us this opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here with you and having you all here with us today. I would like to thank the panelists, which I'll be introducing to you as well. I would like to acknowledge also the presence of my chairman, Mr. Emraj Ramial, Chairman of the Economic Development Board of Mauritius. We also have the Chairperson of the Mauritius Finance here, Mr. Shayam Alamassam, so it's a pleasure to have you here with us today. And of course, we have over 50 delegates from Mauritius. It shows the significance of AFSIC to Mauritius, and also in terms of, I think the reason why we have a lot of Mauritian companies coming here every year is because it's a good ground to establish alliances, partnerships, and to use the Mauritius IFC and try to plug the finance gap on the continent. So the Mauritius Investment Summit, as much as I will give an indication about investment in Mauritius, I will just give a short brief of the economic diversification of Mauritius. But the main aspect of this session today, it's about how do we structure investment across the globe, but more significantly across Africa through the Mauritius IFC. So that's where the debate, that's where the deliberations will be more focused on. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the panel to you. And I have first person to my right is Mr. Sunil Benimandu, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Stock Exchange of Mauritius. And he's been with the stock exchange for a long time. Since I was a kid, he's sort of a mentor and model as well, and I learned a lot from him. So I think it's going to be exciting for all of you to hear from him today. And then we have Mr. Guillaume Paspec, who is the Acting Chief Executive Officer of Bank One in Mauritius. Then we have Mrs. Lena Doman-Brett, who is Head of Global Business at the Financial Services Commission. And I think Lena is going to add a lot of value in terms of policy making and drafting regulations. She's been key in drafting a lot of regulations in Mauritius, like the Securities Exchange Act and so on. So certainly it'll be fantastic to hear from her, as we want to understand why Mauritius, what makes Mauritius so robust and trustworthy. I think Lena can shed light on why. What are the fundamentals that are being done by the regulatory body? And next to her, we have Mr. Nitin Kolapan, who is from Strapping Corporate Services. And the fundamentals of Mauritius in terms of a financial center is about corporate services. It's about establishing structures in Mauritius to pull capital. And Nitin would be ideal to tell us, what makes Mauritius so attractive and why it has been able to pull out significant funds from the globe to be structured across Asia and Africa. And last but not least, we have Mrs. Dovina Pilenaiken from the Ministry of Financial Services and Good Governance, and in terms of shedding lights on the strategies in making Mauritius more appealing, more robust, and also in terms of driving forward agendas to adhere to international standards, requirements like the Financial Action Task Force, whether it's about the European Union, the OECD, and other governing bodies that do request certain fundamentals to guarantee the safety and security of funds transiting through the jurisdiction. So before I go into the first question, I just want to elaborate Mauritius, independent since 1968. At that time, it was a monocrop economy. 80% of the GDP was around agriculture, and 80% of that was on cane industry. And over the years, Mauritius successfully diversified its economy. So in the 70s, it was industrialization. 80s, it was about tourism, hospitality industry. 90s was the introduction of the financial services segment. In the early 2000s, it was about the ICT BBO segment. And more recently, we're moving up the value chain in all the segments that we have put as key pillars. You will find fintech recently in financial services becoming a core pillar with the introduction of the Vitus Act recently, Virtual Asset Inertial Token Offering Services Act, the VCC structure that has put into place. But also you will see a lot of development in biotechnology in Mauritius, pharmaceutical manufacturing, medical devices. One of our biggest exports to France and India currently is about medical devices, catheters that people put into the arteries, when they have high blood pressure and so on, or block arteries. So that evolution, that continuous change and adaptability of Mauritius is significant, and it keeps generating investment opportunities in Mauritius. And through the EDB website, and also through me and my colleague Gitesh, who is here, we would be shedding more investment, more ideas and investment opportunities in Mauritius, if you want to know, in terms of the property development, which is picking up. We have half of the FDI in Mauritius is about property development, about $400 million last year, and we expected that to even grow even further this year. And if everything is on track, by the end of this year, we should be very close to $1 billion of direct investment into Mauritius this year. And so I talked already about manufacturing, going up the value chain, medical devices, pharmaceutical manufacturing, and also in terms of high-tech manufacturing in Mauritius. We used to be one of the top 3 textile exporters in the world in the late 80s, early 90s, but now we move up to high-tech textile manufacturing in Mauritius, and all the labor-intensive manufacturing has been moved to other jurisdictions like Madagascar, Bangladesh, and India, and all the high-tech manufacturing, which is with Industry 4.0, and artificial intelligence being introduced in the manufacturing segment in Mauritius. So we will give you the examples with which are the industrial zones that we have. So just contact the EDB and we'll give you all the investment opportunities in Mauritius on that. So that's a little bit of what I wanted to do as an introduction, because you will see through our discussion today, the financial services sector is going through the same pathway, basically, in terms of continuously re-engineering, revamping itself to meet the requirements of the international governing bodies and to meet the requirements and expectation of international investors as well. So we're going to take you through that path, through that journey, because I just read a quote this morning where Albert Einstein said, "The wise one would be able to adapt to change, be flexible to adapt to change." And that's what Mauritius is about. We are flexible, we adapt to change, we continuously re-engineer, redesign our economy, our offerings to remain relevant to global investors. So I would like to first start, my first question will go to Mrs. Dovina Pillay from the ministry, because I want her to just, since we are talking about this journey of Mauritius, the diversification of the economy of Mauritius, and I would like Dovina to just shed some light on how the ministry is guiding all the different institutions, including the private sector, and getting all of them to collaborate and come forward with the guidelines, the frameworks to establish that robustness, that trustworthiness that investors want to see in the Mauritius IFC to structure their funds eventually into Asia and Africa through the Mauritius IFC.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Vinay. So a quick introduction. I'm Dovina from the Ministry of Financial Services and Good Governance. Just to set the context, the Ministry of Financial Services and Good Governance is actually responsible for the non-banking segment of the financial services sector in Mauritius. Its main objective is actually to develop the financial services sector, come up with policies, strategies, to ensure that we sustain this very important sector for our jurisdiction. A quick, I would say, set of figures. The financial services sector contributes to 14% of the gross domestic product of Mauritius, which already gives you the importance of this sector for our economy. So just to come back to the question of Vinay regarding what the ministry has done to maintain the credibility, the robustness of the jurisdiction, and what are we doing to work with the private sector to sustain the attractiveness of this jurisdiction. So I'll take this question in 3 different segments, Vinay. Firstly, in terms of credibility, I think what the jurisdiction has been doing for the past years already demonstrate that strong robustness of Mauritius. Our financial services sector was, I would say, created in 1992 when we started with the MOBA, the Mauritius Offshore Business Act. And this whole journey has been a learning curve for our jurisdiction. Like you mentioned, there has been lots of adaptability in terms of the products that we have offered, but the key word for Mauritius towards its investors has been to offer safety, to ensure stability, to ensure predictability, and to give stability. I think these are the 4 keywords that have always been very important in the way Mauritius has ensured its financial services continues to grow. So how did we ensure safety? Firstly is the money of our investors is safe in our jurisdiction because we have a regulated framework for our banking sector. I think it's very important for us to highlight that Mauritius had one of the first banks in Mauritius from 1838, which shows that we were amongst the first one to have a banking ecosystem in the southern hemisphere, especially within the Indian Ocean region. Now, in terms of our financial services sector, our financial services is well regulated. The Financial Services Commission is a regulator for non-banking services segment. We are ensuring also that Mauritius is compliant to international norms, and this highlights the credible part and the robustness part. I will just take 2 main instances which demonstrate that Mauritius has really walked the talk in terms of maintaining our credibility. In 2019, when actually Mauritius entered the OECD list of, I would say, non-cooperative tax jurisdiction, the government took a strong commitment that will be able to get out of this list within a year. What did it entail? At that time, there was a need to amend the relevant legislation to make sure that we are compliant with the OECD norms, to make sure that we have an effective framework, and also we had to sustain our effectiveness to make sure that we didn't get back into the list. What is very interesting is since 2019, Mauritius has not got back into the list, and we are whitelisted by the OECD. To such an extent that today Mauritius, from a fiscal perspective, it doesn't have any harmful feature, and also we are we have reached one of the highest standards of compliance in terms of fiscal regime. The second example I would like to highlight is the Financial Action Task Force, which I think is very known to everyone in the room. So Mauritius entered the list of increased monitoring countries in 2020 through the Financial Action Task Force, and this concerned our AML-CFT regime. Again, the government took a strong commitment at the very highest level to get out of this list within 1 year, when everybody was telling us it will take around 3 years or even more. But still, again, we made the relevant amendments. We ensured that there was close collaboration with the private sector and the public sector to be able to come up with relevant laws and ensure effectiveness of our AML-CFT regime. And today, Mauritius is compliant to all the 40 FATF recommendations. Why it was important for me to highlight these 2 examples is because when you have a credible jurisdiction, you make sure that your commitments are fulfilled and that you ensure that you do not get back into these adverse lists. And this is what we have been doing, and to such an extent that today, I think that the close collaboration between the public and private sector is still very much present, because we constantly consult each other to make sure that we are, we speak as one jurisdiction. And this is very important when you're talking about an IFC. Now, to come back to your question regarding this collaboration and how do we ensure the attractiveness, Vinay, I think what the ministry does is to balance that compliance and attractiveness. I think this is very important, because sometimes it's true, very often people tell us that if there's too much compliance, but you cannot have an attractive jurisdiction, you're not an IFC of choice. But the ministry has this important role of, when discussing with the public sector, to put in place regulatory framework or policies or new legislation. We also consult the private sector to make sure that this is not impeding on the attractiveness of the jurisdiction. So this is why it's important that when a law is being enacted or a regulatory framework, and I'm sure Lina will be able to share with us when we'll be talking about how the financial services actually is currently working, you need to have to strike that right balance between the cost of compliance and the attractiveness of the jurisdiction. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Davina. Indeed, there is one thing that people keep asking, in terms of what are we doing to make sure that we keep maintaining that high standard, because it's difficult for people to really fathom the fact that we score 40 out of 40 in the FATF, one of the few jurisdictions. I think there's only 4 jurisdictions in the globe that has achieved that. And what are we doing to maintain, to make sure that we stay at these high level with regards to the international governing bodies that establish these requirements and standards?
True. Actually, in fact, it's very interesting, this question, because one of the key metrics of the Financial Action Task Force, for instance, is how do you sustain the effectiveness of your system? So the different ways that we have actually been able to implement it is to have different committees which are put into place. And I don't want to get into the technicality of how things are within the jurisdiction, but when for instance, I take the example of the Financial Action Task Force. So you have the technical recommendations, you have 40 of them, and you also have effectiveness. So you're assessed on 11 different immediate outcomes. So what the ministry has actually done is we've set up specific committees to look after these immediate outcomes and ensure that whenever there is a legislation which is put into place or a requirement to comply with specific recommendations of the FATF, this committee will actually ensure that this implementation is sustained on the long run. And at the same time, we try to be very proactive. For instance, our jurisdiction will go through its mutual evaluation assessment in 2027, and we also need to submit our national risk assessment at the end of this year. So these committees will actually be working together with the private sector to understand what are the pain points and how do we ensure that effectiveness. So it's not a journey that happened overnight. It started in 2020 when we entered the list, but it is a journey which has continued, and it is not something that you can do on an annual basis. It is a constant work. We have a team at the level of the ministry. So I am from the Financial Services Unit, but you have the Anti-Money Laundering Unit within the ministry who monitors any change within the Financial Action Task Force almost every day, because sometimes the goalpost moves, and then you need to comply with these new recommendations.
No, thank you so much. And how do you reach out to all the operators, professionals across various segments, but that do contribute to transfer of funds?
So actually, we have several, I would say, think tanks that we have set up at the level of the ministry. We also have consultative workshops that we conduct. We have, regular, if I take, for example, from a very regulatory perspective, we actually issue lots of newsletter. The AML-CFT team has a newsletter that it issues to actually the members of the operators to inform about new requirements. And this is one way of disseminating the information that is required and what needs to be complied with.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And I think also under the ministry there's the Financial Services Institute that train other operators like legal lawyers and tax advisors as well on any AML-CFT matters, right?
Correct. And there's one thing maybe that I forgot to mention, Vinay, and which is very important, is also on the governance part. Within the ministry, there is also the National Committee on Corporate Governance, which ensures that there are governance corporate governance requirements at the level of corporate bodies. There is the National Code of Corporate Governance, and my colleague Sunil is one of the director of this committee. And this code is being constantly reviewed and updated. And we also have the Office of Public Sector Governance, which ensures governance within the public sector.
Thank you so much, Dovina. We'll now move to one of the service providers, Nitin, from Stratford Corporate Services. And Nitin, from your end, we would like to hear, for the past 30 years or 33 years, Mauritius has been excellent in structuring cross-border flow of funds and creation of structures for pooling of funds. Yep. Can you take us, you as a professional in the industry, why Mauritius, when your clients come to you, why Mauritius, and what are the key fundamental services or USPs that your organization and Mauritius has?
So good morning everyone. So thank you Vinay for the question. So what happens at Mauritius is that, just to bounce back on what Dovina said earlier, is that the two very important things to note is that Mauritius is tax compliant with respect to the OECD. That's very important. The second thing is in terms of AML, CFT, anti-money laundering, combating the finance of terrorism, Mauritius is on the white list, so we have a clean sheet from the global watchdog, that is FATF. And so we have so many advantages over the years that has really encouraged international investors to use Mauritius. For example, just name a few of them. So if a client is coming towards us as a corporate service provider, then there are many selling points, many USPs, I can call it. So first one being that a foreigner can own a Mauritius company 100%. There's no need for a local partner. This is definitely a very good advantage for a lot of African countries. Second one is there are no foreign exchange control in Mauritius, so that's very critical for trade and investment. So foreign investors can channel investment and trade in and out of Mauritius, as we want. And I think the third one is definitely, you can have multi-currency accounts, bank accounts in Mauritius open, so which facilitate at the same time, international trade with a lot of countries. So this is from Mauritius perspective, but from a corporate service provider, there are many things which you can expect. The first one is in terms of the needs of a client. Is it a corporate need or is it a private need? So if it is a corporate need, then we're talking about companies. So if we talk about companies, when we're talking about activities, whether it is an investment holding, whether it's going to be trading, whether it's going to be consultancy. So if we talk about private needs, when we talk about trusts, foundations, we talk about family office. So it all depends on the needs of our clients. So Mauritius has been used very extensively for the last 15, 20 years to attract a lot of investment, a lot of private wealth management in Mauritius itself, but channeling a lot of investment and trade in Africa. So that's very important. And if we talk about, we can also talk about fund administration. So fund administration setup and ongoing administration is quite big in Mauritius as well. So we can set up open-ended closed-end fund. We can also set up, recently there's the VCC, Variable Capital Company as well. That's another advantage of setting up in Mauritius. And then there are ongoing post-licensing requirements in terms of corporate governance, compliance. Like I mentioned earlier, Mauritius is fully compliant with FATF. So we ensure that our clients are compliant at all times. We also assist our clients when it comes to trade. For example, Mauritius has very good preferential trade agreements with India, with China, with a lot of African countries, SADC, COMESA. So we also assist our clients, to facilitate their business for that countries. Yeah.
Thank you, Nitin. You mentioned VCC, Variable Capital Company. That's a new structure recently launched in Mauritius. What's the traction on VCC from your end?
Okay, I think the first point about VCC is all about its flexibility. There's a couple of things to the VCC. The first one is it's efficient. Operationally, it's very efficient. For example, using a VCC structure, you can have either a single fund or an umbrella fund. The second thing which is interesting about VCC is that within that VCC structure, you can have both an open-ended fund and a closed-ended fund as well. So that's very important. a lot of flexibility. Second point, which is important, is in terms of cost efficiency. For what kind of VCC structure, you only have a cost of a single license, which makes sense from a costing perspective. A third interesting advantage for VCC is that you can separate the assets and the liabilities even at winding up, which means that no sub-funds, no SPVs which are put under the VCC or gets affected by each other.
Yeah.
And maybe a fourth advantage with VCC is that you can do cross-investment between the sub-funds and the SPVs, just to name a few.
Yeah, so you can do cross-investment.
Yes.
But the risks are ring-fenced for each of the
Correct.
structures.
In terms of assets and liabilities, that's right, yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. And on the Vitus side, have you had any luck for any virtual asset licenses?
Yes, but just to come back on VCC, so who are the users of VCC? So we're talking about private equity, we're talking about hedge funds, we're talking about real estate and infrastructure funds, we're talking about family office as well. These are the users for VCCs basically. Yeah. And on Vitus, we're getting a lot of queries from clients because it's quite a new act, I have to say. Yeah. So we have been getting quite a lot of traction on that because it is the standard is quite big actually, the Vitus Act.
Yeah. So the Vitus Act is the Virtual Asset Initial Token Offering Services Act, and it's got 5 digital or virtual asset licenses: the dealer broker license, the virtual asset custodian licenses, the virtual asset advisory licenses, virtual asset marketplace, I believe, and the 5th one is, which one did I miss? Dealer broker, custodian, advisory, marketplace, and well, that's 5 licenses. Anyway, so it will come back when you off stage, but we'll share that with you. So what we know is that there are already about 12 licensed operators in Mauritius on the virtual asset fintech side. And this is quite interesting. As I said, Mauritius tends to re-engineer, revamp, and meet the expectations of investors, as we move along, because the world is very dynamic. At one stage it was, fun and easy for everybody to travel across the globe, but now there's a lot of volatility. I was traveling from Dubai to London, and we were flying over the area where it's Israel area and Lebanon, and I'm looking down and say, is there any one of these missiles that will come and hit the plane? So in terms of virtual asset, it allows you, we're doing business sitting, we can be sitting in Mauritius and you could be having meeting across the globe from Mauritius. That's the way the world is moving. But in terms of virtual asset and digitalization, that's a new world of wonders for investment in Africa. Imagine with tokenization, the digital marketplace, the virtual asset exchange, for example, all these, how you can reach out to the small investors that has $1,000 to $10,000, and they can go on such exchanges to invest, like crowdfunding, pooling of funds. It's a new sphere, new scope coming up for the continent of Africa that has a finance gap of about $300 billion annually, according to the IMF, on structures and project investment. That's quite a huge gap to fill. And that's why we're coming up to the next speaker. Basically, I would like to ask the next question to Ms. Lina from the Financial Services Commission, because we've been hearing from the ministry. We heard on Nitin that traditionally how we've been structuring, putting structures in Mauritius, and the VCC, the latest structure in Mauritius, VCC funds. We've seen a lot of tractions. I think there are over 100 VCC funds that have set up in the Mauritius IFC already. And Lina, as the regulatory body, in terms of, nowadays when companies come, they do the application, they want a streamlined process, they want to know there is some certainty in terms of the documentation that they send and everything, and the license are being done in a fast and efficient way. What is the regulatory body doing currently that will give certain certainties to the investors if they want to set up a structure in Mauritius that will be done in a very fast, efficient way, and there's no duplication of any type of works and so on?
Right. Okay, good morning, everyone. So, listening to my 2 colleagues on the panel, I would like to add, before answering your question, Vinay, is that Mauritius is equal to resilience, because we've had a lot of challenges, but you will note within a year, We've been out of all those grey lists and black lists. So if I go back in one line, back in 2010, when Mauritius was grey listed by the OECD, so I was the one leading the assessment from the regulator. So within a year, we made a lot of changes to the law, to name it the Financial Services Act, Companies Act, Trust Act, Income Tax Act, the Registrar of Companies Act, the Companies Act. So everything was done very quickly. So this is a sign of resilience for Mauritius. And the second point I would like to bring to you is that our smallness, the beauty of Mauritius is its smallness. So it takes us just sending an email on the eve, we can convene all the CEOs and the decision makers the next day to discuss, thrash out the issues, take the policy decisions on the same day, and implementation within the same week. So we can amend rules, regulations, laws. So just a call away, we get the State Law Office being represented, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Financial Services, the regulator, and the promotion arm, whoever's required in that meeting. Things happen very quickly in Mauritius. There's no bureaucracy, there's no red tapeism like in bigger countries. So this is the beauty of being small, and this is the beauty of being an international financial center. So I wanted to mention this, and even on the FATF grey list, we came out within a year, and you would reckon we were grey listed during a period of COVID. And in other countries, nothing was happening during COVID. But in Mauritius, our people from the regulator, we had a lot of figures to meet and a lot of undertakings we took on behalf of the FATF to do more than 150 on-site inspections. So our staff at the regulator worked during COVID, went on-site, conducted all the on-site inspections, did the reporting, and we came out very quickly. It's one of the countries which came out fast and quick from the grey list. So as a result, there's a lot of countries being on the grey list currently and who have been on the grey list soliciting the help of Mauritius, the assistance through our bilateral agreements or MOUs or MMOUs that we've signed internationally, seeking our help and say, please assist us in getting out from their grey list. So we are a model internationally of how quick and how fast we react to international issues. So coming to Vinay's question on how fast we issue licenses in Mauritius. So the Commission, the FSC, has invested millions of rupees, several millions, to create a new platform. So we've been progressing. We have old platforms, and now the latest is called the FSC One platform with latest technology. And it's a huge budget that has been dedicated for this system. So it has been developed. Everything is being done online. Your application is online. So you have one interface for the user, which are the industry players. So you can build your files, stop wherever you've reached, carry on building up until you've got all your documents, your paperwork, and meeting the regulatory requirements. And reaching the end, you can push, pay your fees, of course, then push the application on the regulator's side, and it is allocated in a systematic manner, and we have processes, doing the assessment, pushing queries, live mode. So you can reply, you can resubmit your documentation. The assessment is done on a real-time basis. So we've reached a few phases of development of this platform. It is again being improved. So we have a budget annually for that, and there are new modules being added to make it more easy for applicants to get a license. So how do we get to improve that system? It's by organizing. We hold monthly meetings with the representative of the industry. And there are also quarterly meetings which are being chaired by the chairperson in the presence of the CEO. So these are ongoing commitments that the regulator has taken vis-à-vis the industry to make things happen on a continuous basis. So you are always being heard. And there are internal committees at the FSC where we discuss, we thrash out, and we find solutions and shortcuts how to make life of industry players easier and concurrently to get a license faster. And that is the whole issue that we want to sort out.
Thank you, Lina. There are two key things that investors, when they look at Africa, and it little bit of deters them from investing in Africa. One is the risk perception, and the other one is about every investor. The first thing that they look at before putting money in a jurisdiction is how easy it is to get out in terms of exit strategy. And I would love to now, ask the fourth question to Mr. Sunil from the Stock Exchange of Mauritius. Over the past years, the Stock Exchange has implemented a lot of transformative changes, frameworks to accommodate in terms of the expansion of growth, basically, and then to make capital market more accessible to promoters, operators, and investors as well. So can you elaborate, in terms of the fundamental changes and share some, of your insight or, any data that you would want to take us through in terms of the evolution of the Stock Exchange of Mauritius and how this platform could be significant for partly plugging the finance gap onto the continent?
Thank you, Vinay. First, you make me feel like a dinosaur when you say that. You've known me since you were a kid, but never mind. So I think to answer your question, I need to give you some form of historical perspective to the development of the stock exchange. We are an exchange which is relatively young, with a history of only 35 years. And during the first 20 years of our history, we were essentially an equity-centric domestic exchange, catering for our domestic issuers and essentially for our domestic investors. But then we realized that to tackle the perennial issue of operating within an island economy with its structural constraints, we had to think outside. Mm-hmm. And that's when, in 2008, we embarked on what I call an internationalization strategy, which aimed essentially at moving away from that domestic equity-centric focus to embrace a multi-asset class internationalization focus. But of course, when you want to do such a strategic shift, you need to sit back and think about how do you build the right ecosystem to make that a reality. And that's what we did, and we realized that the starting point of this challenging journey would be to look our listing framework, address the shortcomings of that framework, and then move towards a framework that would be conducive to that multi-asset class listing. Because in those days, we were essentially only listing equity products and domestic equity products, and a couple of debt products, but not a lot. So we reformed our listing framework, and we introduced a number of innovative rules, which has since then allowed us to list a variety of products ranging from depository receipts, structured products, exchange-traded funds, exchange-traded notes, and other types of financial products. And then we say that if we want to be considered as an international exchange, what is it that we needed to do to differentiate ourselves from a regional exchange within Africa or even continental exchanges within Africa? And we realized that Mauritius had a number of advantages that we could leverage on. For example, Nitin was talking about the ability for investors to hold multi-currency accounts. And we realized that Mauritius also gave the opportunity, because of this multi-currency focus, for us as an exchange to set up an operational framework that would allow an issuer to list, capital raise, trade, and settle in US dollar, in British pounds, in South African rands, in euro, and of course in Mauritius rupee. So we went ahead, and after discussing with banks in Mauritius and the central bank, we set up a multi-currency capital raising, listing, trading, and settlement platform, which makes us the only exchange in Africa today that can offer to an issuer that wide flexibility in terms of in which currency to trade, to list and trade. And this is important because when you want to attract an issuer and tell that issuer that, you know, Mauritius is a good place to raise capital and to list and trade, you need to be able to give that to that issuer the ability to choose in what currency it wants to raise the capital, because this allows this issuer to target institutional but also retail investors in specific regions of the world and then come to you. So we did that. And then, of course, we then started engaging with service providers within the financial services sector in Mauritius so as to give some form of impetus to that internationalization strategy, and the natural support that we could get was from service providers in the global business sector. You know, the global business sector in Mauritius, on the one hand, are structuring global funds to invest in India, to invest in Africa and elsewhere. And on the other hand, they are structuring global business companies that are also making direct investments around the world. And I think we sit in a very comfortable position to capitalize on this potential to link those that have the funds, that is those global funds that are there, and those that need the capital, which are those global business companies. And we as an exchange, we sit in the middle and we provide that potential exit that you mentioned. And thanks to this engagement, very active, because sometimes when you're engaging into innovative solutions to problems, it's not easy to move very fast, but you need to work hard. I always tell my colleagues at the exchange, whenever we try to come forward with something innovative, remember that we are operating within a narrowed island economy, and therefore we need to work 10 or 20 times harder than somebody that is sitting in London, which has an ecosystem which is well developed. So we engage with those management companies, and we managed to convince them that other than just structuring companies for taxation optimization and other things, there are great opportunities to grow that business and become capital raising platforms. So that's when we went ahead. So I must tell you, sometimes when you start a journey, the best way to know whether you were right or wrong in terms of embracing that journey is to look at data and look at statistics. So that journey started in 2008, 2009, but really started taking shape in 2010, 2011. And during that journey, I can tell you we have had 240 new listings cutting across different asset classes, out of which more than half are non-Mauritian. So when I say I'm talking about debt, ETFs, and so on. And the beauty about it is we've brought some kind of credence to this Africa play. We've managed to attract, right now we have 39 products that are either originated in Africa or originated in Mauritius, but deriving 50% of the revenue in Africa. So leveraging on that strength, we've set up an Africa board on which we list 16 African or Mauritian companies, but deriving more than 50%. So to be on that board, you need to have an Africa focus. And it's been a great journey. And then last but not least, other than those diversity of listings, our platform has been used to raise capital for all the local, but also those global business companies, those Africa-focused companies. And throughout that 2010 and 2024 period, $7 billion have been raised. Of course, the majority outside of Mauritius, because Mauritius is small. But I think it just shows that there is a potential. We only at the start, very inceptional start of the journey, but I strongly believe that the future of the IFC in Mauritius is going to be capital markets driven.
Certainly as investors are looking for ways, meaningful ways to mitigate risk, and there's no better way to understand the risk of investment through a properly set market. And I do understand from talks we had that you're also planning to launch a high growth segment very soon for African issuers and also niche issuers globally.
Yes.
Can you share with us a little bit on that, and also are you intending to track the performance of such an index?
Yeah, so building on our positive advances on the Africa board, we are trying now to add a new leg to that Africa strategy by coming up very soon with what we call the SEM, high growth segment, which we will call SEMEX, which initially is going to track high growth African issuers, and eventually, if this works, we're going to, of course, use that platform to track niche high growth international issuers. But we're starting in the beginning with high growth African issuers, and to qualify to be on that high growth segment, a company needs to demonstrate that it has had a compound annual growth in terms of its revenue over the last 3 years of annualized of at least 25%, or 100% over the last 5 years. It has to demonstrate that it has been profitable, of course, during that period. And we've already, in fact, we've received already applications for 3 of these companies, and we are working very closely with Africa Eats, which is a holding company which has invested, I think, in more than 22 companies across the African continent, and it has chosen the Mauritian exchange to float 3 initially of its underlying companies and raise capital through the Mauritius platform, and there are 2 or 3 others that will be coming in 2025. And we strongly believe that this initiative, if it is successful, will definitely add a dimension to this whole, narrative of making Mauritius a funding platform, a hub for Africa. So once we start selling that story, I think we would be in an ideal position to say that, concretely, with concrete proofs, that, African entities that are looking for funding need to seriously think Mauritius and need to seriously think Stock Exchange of Mauritius to provide them with that funding ability, and take them or accompany them to the next journey of their growth strategy.
Certainly. I've seen somewhere, I went, there was a sign saying, in God we have faith, but in data we believe.
Yes.
Right, so
Absolutely.
That's the importance of data for investment decisions that you take. Data is critical. And I want to now ask Guillaume from Bank One, which has its origins from East Africa as well. And as a regional bank, in terms of flow of funds, in terms of the risk perceptions and the safety, and and guaranteeing the robustness of the jurisdiction of Mauritius. What is the Bank One putting in place, and how do you successfully service your customers through Mauritius and for Africa, basically?
Yeah. Thank you, Vinay. I hope I am not the only non-Mauritian guy in the room. Yes, I'm French, and let me maybe introduce my. I start to work in Europe, in Paris, and after in Luxembourg before to move to Mauritius in 2014. What a journey! What a journey during the 10 years in Mauritius. As if I compare Luxembourg to Mauritius, in fact, we have a lot of similitude. We are definitely a hub, of course, not in the same location, more near to Africa, and I think it is really the key differentiation with Luxembourg, because we have, as I already said, many similitudes. Vinay, you mentioned, Bank One is a good example. Of course, we have around 20 banks in Mauritius, regulated, as you mentioned earlier. Bank One is one of them, and we have two shareholders. One is a Mauritian conglomerate, one of the biggest one, namely Ciel, and the other one is I&M Group, who owns some banks in Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Uganda. And you can see what does it mean. For us, it is the ability to have a good knowledge of the African market, and to help our clients, corporate clients, individual clients, to have access to those markets. But also on the both way, we have many FI, many African banks who are using our international platform to have access, for example, for US Treasury, Eurobonds issued by African countries, Eurobonds in dollars. The most volume we trade, for example, at this time is Kenyan Eurobonds in dollar. So just to give you the sense of the hub in Mauritius, we're really well located near Africa to serve for the both way. In terms of, you mentioned, when you put money in a bank, definitely, what is the key is not to lose your money. When you have FI, when you have individuals, when they put money, of course, what they will request, what is the risk to put my money in your bank. And as we mentioned earlier during the session, we are really regulated. I can tell you, now the same level at Luxembourg, sometimes more. And we need really to explain that to our clients, because we have due diligence to know, to monitoring transaction and so on. So I can tell you today we are at the same level. We have many control from the regulator in terms of concentration of the risk, or liquidity ratio, and definitely it is really, I think, good for our clients to know that the place is really under control. And I think it is, as I mentioned earlier, a key to continue to grow, but because definitely I can attest during the past 10 years, the attractivity of Mauritius continue really in a very good trend from Africa, but also from other countries. As you know, Mauritius has a lot of advantages for foreigners, high net worth individuals who sometimes decide to locate them in Mauritius due to the tax, I will say, advantage that when you are resident, the level of the tax, of course, is you have some taxes, definitely, in Mauritius, but if you compare what you have today in some countries, definitely it is already a key advantage.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Certainly, we've been hearing that often from international players in terms of the requirements in Mauritius are at par with globally renowned jurisdictions, Luxembourg and so on. Certainly, we heard that, and there's a lot of Mauritians working in Luxembourg as well, so that's why the level is high there as well. But yeah, Lina, coming back to you from the FSC, in terms of when we come to compliance and structures going forward, what the FSC has established in terms of making sure we keep at par with the dynamicity of the dynamism in the industry and globally, the volatility, and how the FSC is engaging to make sure that the structures, everything is being properly monitored from the regulatory body.
Okay, so on this front, you may say there's a cost of compliance, but there's a cost of compliance in all jurisdictions. So to comply with international standards, it costs, and to implement it locally, of course, it costs. But what guarantee international high net worth institutional investors have is a certainty of a safe and transparent jurisdiction. It could be slightly little more expensive, but those big investors, they have the safety in their mind that everything is safe, is guaranteed in Mauritius, the structures are there, the compliance is all across, so we can never fail. This is, again, a good point for Mauritius. And what we do have in place as well is the known to the commission concept that we are already putting in place. So if you're a known investor and you already have structures in Mauritius, like fund structures with a lifetime of 10, 15 years, you're already established in Mauritius, you want to set up an additional fund, a sub-fund, a parallel fund, you've got a fast route because you're already known to the commission. So you won't be asked again, resubmit this document, all the KYC and everything. There will be a fast track, shorter route to obtaining a license. This is in the final stage and it's going to be implemented shortly. So we have already taken on board. Our FSC1 platform is being amended now to cater for existing investors already doing business in Mauritius, already known to the jurisdiction with a fast track route. So that will be a good selling point, and that will be something very nice to have, rather than wait, get into the queue and wait for your license. That is another feature that we're implementing currently. So we are always on the move, we are always upgrading, we're always changing based on the request of the industry and the service providers. Also, what we have at the FSC is a one-stop shop. So it's a nice place. If you haven't used it, please come to Mauritius, request for a meeting. It's called a one-stop shop where you meet the regulator. It's one half of the floor at our building dedicated for investors. So you come with your investors, you call for a meeting, you have a representative from the EDB to help you know how to route and how to plan your investment. You will have a representative from the regulator depending on which type of license you want. So one expert from that department will come join in the meeting, and you'll have one representative from the CBRD, the Registrar of Companies, who would advise you how to fast track and get things move very quickly. So this is a feature. It's not really being used to the optimum. So I'll invite all of you, industry players and investors, please send requests for meeting. We have a dedicated email address for that, and we'll group everyone under one roof when you can get exposed to all the policymakers. We also have now a call center where all the calls are being logged, a ticketing system is in place, and your calls are being allocated to the different departments. And also we are analyzing the data of all the calls. So let's say we got like 10,000 calls a month. We can relate to which type of activities, which type of licenses, and we know that in these particular areas, people need more information. And using this data, we are planning to hold training sessions with industry players so that they get the level of understanding and what are the areas which are not clear. Make it clear, question and answer sessions, And this is how we're progressing. So we are here, we are listening. Mauritius is there for business, and we dedicate a lot of time and a lot of effort to make things happen. So you can even track the progress of your application on the system, and this system is being upgraded continuously. I forgot your question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Lina. Yeah, certainly that's very useful. And Davina, moving forward, what are we planning for the Mauritius IFC as we aim now? We mentioned earlier in terms of re-engineering, revamping, remaining relevant. There are new visions for the Mauritius IFC going forward in terms of products, expanding the breadth of services in the Mauritius IFC. Can you take us through the thinking at the level of ministry, strategically, what are being considered?
Absolutely, Vinay. I think you said a very interesting word is what was the thinking. If we ask ourselves a question, what is important for an investor when choosing an international financial center? I think we have a set of answers. The first one is it's important for the money of the investor to be safe. This is crucial because very often we're talking about hard-earned money, we're talking about either the person's own family investment, so this is crucial. The second one is about the offers of the jurisdiction in terms of how do I make sure that what I'm investing in will bring me the necessary amount of return. So you need to have a series of opportunities in which you can offer, you can structure your investment. The third one is about the stability of this jurisdiction in terms of its political stability, in terms of the stability of the sector, in terms of the predictability of the product. And you also need to be able to get certainty in terms of the easiness of being able to do business in this country. Bearing in mind these different, I would say, axes, we have thought about the way we need to protect this sector, but also give new drivers of growth for the financial services sector. So in terms of how do we make sure that it's easy to do business in Mauritius, I think it's very important for us to highlight that Mauritius has a series of important instruments, such as the Investment Promotion and Protection Agreement, such as the Free Trade Agreements with India, China, and we are also member of the African Free Trade Continental Agreement. Why it's important for us to know about the Investment Promotion and Protection Agreement is tomorrow when you are making investment in another country, your money is safe if it is structured through Mauritius. So you do not run the risk of the money being, for instance, attached, or the money is being, for instance, subject to a national
expropriation.
It is appropriation. So this is very important because Mauritius is party to this agreement. The next item that I would also like to highlight is in terms of how do we ensure that we are offering the stability and the certainty is through our tax regime. I've spoken before around the compliance part, but it's also about how do we make our products also very attractive. We have had the global business sector for a while, but we have also come up with new products. And Nitin mentioned about the variable capital company. We've spoken about the virtual asset and initial token offering. We have also new products that we've put into place, like the peer-to-peer lending, the crowdfunding, which is within the fintech arena of products. And all these different products are actually very useful, not only for the Mauritian market, but also for the African market. Mm-hmm. So I take the example of the variable capital company, and I think that this is one of the products which was worked very closely between the public sector and the private sector to be able to make an enhanced version of what we have heard before. Because you are able to really, to segregate your assets. You are able to also now, since the previous budget, include a segment pertaining to your wealth management and family office, which is very interesting because whilst you are segregating your different, work stream, let's say for instance tomorrow you have a family from abroad who wants to set up a structure in Mauritius to do its own business, you have the possibility of having another sub-fund which is for your own wealth and your own money. So this is very interesting. And this takes me to the new drivers of growth that we have for the Mauritius IFC. It's important that we have a USP. And what is the USP of Mauritius is whenever you are investing in the country, you have that different option for your money, but also for your company. So some key drivers. Firstly, we've spoken about wealth management and family office. So we have certain very interesting products, like I mentioned about the variable company, which is being extended to family office. We have the wealth manager and family officer license, which has been introduced in the previous budget. We are also working very closely with the private sector to put into place a proper landscape for wealth management and family office. So this is a key, I would say, driver for our next era of the financial services sector. The second one is around sustainable financing. Mauritius has gone, I think there has been a journey in sustainable financing since 2021. In fact, there has been two very important guidelines that have been put forward, one by the Bank of Mauritius and the second one by the Financial Services Commission, to allow for sustainable bonds to be issued. So for the Bank of Mauritius, it is actually a guideline for sovereign sustainable bond. And the Financial Services Commission has actually issued a guideline for corporate sustainable bonds. The Ministry of Finance has also come up with a sustainable finance framework to allow for investment into sustainable projects in Mauritius. And what is also very interesting is we're working currently on a sustainable investment framework. And here I would like to pause and share a small, I would say, anecdote which we had between one of our visits in Europe. Actually, when the previous minister actually had a visit to the European Investment Bank, there was one portfolio that they had with regards to investment into Africa, 150 billion euros. And of course, Mauritius visited EIB to understand whether this could actually be structured within Mauritius to be able to give access to capital to other African countries. One of the key asks of EIB was whether Mauritius had a sustainable finance framework to ensure that there's no greenwashing, to ensure that actually there was a proper monitoring framework to allow this amount of money to get into Mauritius. I'll be very honest, at that time, we didn't have such a framework. But what we did is we started right away working on such a framework, and we managed to secure funds from the African Development Bank to actually come up with such a framework. So the objective of this framework is to give comfort to all these different DFIs from UK, from US, from EU, that you have a country which has a right framework for you to be able to unlock this capital for Africa. And we did a study, at EDB with regards to capital economics, that there is a need for around $350 billion for sustainable investment into Africa.
Thank you. Thank you, Dovina. We'll move on because we still got more questions. Nitin, in terms of going forward and, how's Treffing, planning to, in terms of the new products, what are coming on the avenues forward. But one thing which I wanted to pay attention to, when Mauritius aligned with the MLIs of the OECD, and we reviewed the DTA of India, at that time, 2015, people were predicting that there will be a drop of funds in domiciling in Mauritius. But actually, we're seeing now a resurgence of global funds in Mauritius. Can you take us through that as well? What your international customers, why they're still sticking with Mauritius and growing their funds in Mauritius now?
So I think that's a very good question. I think there's two main reasons for that. One is, I think, like you mentioned earlier, is that the Mauritius IFC has been really growing like over 20, 30 years. So when we speak about clients, we speak about investors, it's really about developing relationships. So I think that's very important. So the word relationship is very important. So clients and investors are not just a number at the end of the day. So they interact with us mainly as corporate service providers. We develop relationship with them. So most of the time, the initial relationship is just to set up a structure, for example, a plain structure, let's put it like that. And then over time, when they come to know that, we are as good or even better as other IFCs, and within taking on from there, when we can also expose them to other products, to other features. So when you mention about, the DTA kind of falling apart, so even those clients, since they have been used to Mauritius, they have been used to the quality of the work, we have been used to us being bilingual, English and French speaking as well. And also, we have to be mindful that in terms of quality, we're not that expensive as well compared to other IFCs. So the cost quality basis is already there in Mauritius, and the best business development comes from your existing client as well. Yeah. So I think that's the best BD which existing clients do for Mauritius. So all of them in one way or the other have referred the lawyers, the fund managers, the investment advisors, the banks as well, globally, to set up something in Mauritius directly or indirectly. So I think this is what has happened on the first level. On the second level, I mean, naturally, Mauritius forms part of the African continent. So in that respect, it's quite natural that we have that kind of bonding, and naturally business goes through Mauritius into Africa and outside African continent into Mauritius into Africa. Long story cut short, yeah. If I can put it like that, yeah.
No, thank you. We've been told we welcome with the chairman, the CEO of GIPC, Ghana Investment Promotion Center, 2 months ago, Mr. Yofi Grant, very excellent IPA professional. And he did mention that the biggest investor in Ghana currently is Mauritius, and that's mostly structured for the Mauritius IFC into Ghana. And we mentioned earlier 2 key things that deters investors is perception of risk, and we talk about the Mauritius IFC mitigating that risk. We heard from the ministry, we heard from the regulatory body, and the other aspect is exit strategy, because I was told once, before you invest in the country, think about how easy it is to get out. If you can't get out, don't go in. Now, similar thinking for investors. You put your money in an investment, it grows tenfold, and how do you capitalize? How do you get your money? How do you liquefy that? And I think that's a task potentially. I would like to ask Sunil if he could take us through what the Stock Exchange of Mauritius is envisaging in terms of finding a proper solution for future investors in using the exchange for investment and liquefying their investment when and where required.
Thank you, Vinay. I think you've touched on a very important problem that Africa, and especially African exchanges, face in general. It's the perennial problem of liquidity, okay? Mm-hmm. So if you look at data on African exchanges, including Mauritius, the typical data that is used to measure secondary market liquidity on an exchange is what they call the turnover ratio, which is the amount of shares that are traded on an annual basis divided by the market cap of the exchange, or alternatively the total number of shares that are floated on an exchange. So you look at how many shares have traded during a year divided by the number of shares that exist. So if you look at across Africa, I think that turnover ratio currently stands below 5%, okay? So it's very clear that this is an important issue, an issue that needs to be addressed so as to not only attract issuers to come to your market, but also to attract, as you mentioned, investors, because there are great opportunities. In fact, just before I answer this question, there's one thing. You were talking initially about the resilience of Mauritius historically, of the Mauritian economy and so on. Just wanted to share some statistics with you to underscore the resilience of the corporate sector in Mauritius. So I was doing some data mining a few weeks ago to see how, let's say, the top 10 listed companies in Mauritius in terms of market cap have done in a post-COVID area. And I was myself pleasantly surprised to talk about not only resilience, but the ability to rebound, and rebound in a fantastic way. So I chose 2019 as a base year, because that was a year which was a normal year where there was no COVID. And what we found was the top 10 largest companies in Mauritius in terms of market cap in 2019 had a cumulative net profit after tax of 12 billion Mauritian rupees. Those are the facts based on the annual reports in 2019. Fast forward 4 years, 2023, the same 10 companies, after COVID, their cumulative net profit after tax had gone up in Mauritian rupees to 39 billion Mauritian rupees from 12 billion in 4 years. Then, of course, I said, okay, there's been inflation, and then the Mauritian rupee has depreciated, so let's deflate that total profit after tax by the dollar. Let's come with a dollar assessment of the total profit. And even then, so 2019, it was 330 cumulative for the 10 largest $1 million. 2023, it's $880 million. So even in US dollars, it's more than double, almost treble. And I've not looked at because those results are coming out. 2024, we already shown a lot of growth. So I think it's a clear indication of the ability of not only the Mauritian economy, not only the country, but also the corporate sector to readjust, re-engineer, rebound, look for new opportunities, and drive growth. So I think it was an important addition that I wanted to make. So now I come back to the fundamental question you've asked. I think it's not an easy call, but there are solutions to that, and we at the level of the SEM, we are actively working on trying to come up with solutions. So let me mention what we will be doing and launching in the coming weeks. So we've introduced the rules for market making, which would allow a market maker to quote two-way prices on a daily basis on the shares that are listed. And we've even worked on the parameters that this market maker should satisfy so that the spread between the buy and sell prices that they quote are not too far apart. So we think that this is definitely one solution to addressing the problem of liquidity, because once, as an investor on a particular stock X, I know that there are market makers that at all times will be buying and selling my stock. So if I see this company as being a growth company, a company worth investing in, I have the comfort that the day that I want to get out, at least there are people standing by. So I think this is something that would add a new dimension. Of course, we need to get people to register as market makers. So this is something that we've already come up with rules, but we're waiting for approvals, and then we will launch it in the near future. That's number one. Number two, I think it's always a question of growing your investor base. So if I look at Mauritius now we have 100,000 institutional and retail investors registered in the CDS, which are people that have invested and hold shares. So if we want to grow liquidity other than the market making thing, I think we need to have a view of how to increase that investor base. But at the same time, we need to accompany it with diversifying the product offerings that we have on the market, so that these product offerings would suit the risk appetite of different types of people, which would in itself attract more people. So we also, by our internationalization strategy and so on, working on that. But I think more importantly, Vinay, as I mentioned previously, I think as we strategize, be it at the level of the ministry, be it at the level of the EDB, be it at the level of the regulator, I think we need to do what Singapore did in the 1980s. So Singapore in the 1980s was just starting its journey in developing its financial sector. And what they said is, we want to be the funding hub for Asia, okay? Yeah. And in those days, India had hardly grown, China had hardly been, so they were ideally positioned. Yeah. So I think as a jurisdiction, as part of the development of the IFC's journey, and in fact this is linked to when you study the life cycle of IFCs, you would invariably see that capital markets at some point become the driver high value services. So I think we will also go through that same life cycle, but of course we have some constraints, like the very small nature of our internal market and so on. So we need to sit down and say, we want Mauritius, just as Singapore said, we want Mauritius to become a funding hub for Africa. Yeah. Then it's a question, how do we bring together the ingredients or the attributes? How do we build that ecosystem? And I think for me, building that ecosystem means, first, you yourself mentioned when we were talking about this panel that there are $700 billion harbored in our IFC in terms of funds and things like that. If we are able, out of these 700 billion, because most of these funds know exactly where they want to invest, but they always sit on cash. Right. If we're able to attract 10% of that 700 billion, which will grow in the future, we're talking about a potential funding capacity of 70 billion. Yeah. So if we are able to demonstrate to companies in Africa that Mauritius can provide you with a funding solution to grow in the future, I think they will start looking at us. And then you start looking at how to bring those investment banks, asset managers, to relocate their business in Mauritius so that they can also provide those global order flows that are needed to grow Mauritius as a funding place. So this is something. You need to drive the liquidity issue, which we are trying to do. And of course, as an exchange at some point, but this is a chicken and egg situation. You need to bring down your transaction costs. Certainly. You know? So you need to be able to trade at much lower costs than we are currently trading. But as I mentioned, it's a chicken and egg situation. As we grow, we would be in a better position. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunil. We come to the end, but I'll leave the last word for Guillaume because I didn't have the chance to ask for the second question. So as the Bank One, just close on how we're going to support everything we heard today.
I will just come back very fast on the safety. As our client for all the banks in Mauritius sometimes are funds, investment fund, high net worth bank, FI and so on. So when they don't want to take the Mauritian risk, what they are doing, they are buying, for example, US treasuries, and all in the Bank of Mauritius, all the securities are out of the balance sheet of the bank. So definitely it gives confidence to all those clients.
Thank you, Guillaume. That was very fast. So I would like for you to put your hands together to thank this wonderful panel. I'm sure we learned a lot about Mauritius, and we'll get the stream link shared with all of you so you can send that to all your stakeholders to know more about the Mauritius IFC going forward. So thank you all for your attention. Enjoy lunch, and we'll see you soon. And we're here to talk to you for any other questions you may have. Thank you, everybody.